What are some things rich kids won't understand growing up? Story 1. Moving past all the usual material stuff, one thing that sucked for me growing up was that I couldn't just up and go places when invited, even if it was free or their parents covered the cost of the activity. My mother was always broke, and though we had a car, gas was reserved for the work commute only. I couldn't just get a ride from my mom, and she never had spare change for the bus. Every dollar was accounted for. I got a lot of, "Come to the movies with us, and don't worry, I'll pay for you, just be across the city by 5:30. It sucked having to explain yet again that no money meant no money for anything, even a ride. The cost of transportation is a huge indicator of just how poor you are. I used to bike to and from work, 10 miles each way because I was saving money for college and didn't want to buy a car. This stuff persists into adulthood. I make as much money as a friend of mine who doesn't understand why people aren't lining up for the bachelor party he is throwing on a cruise liner. He doesn't get that we all just can't, at almost 30, have our parents toss us a couple of grand to blow in a week. So relatable. Growing up, I lived in a rural area, while my friends all lived in the city. Anytime I wanted to hang out with them, I had to bike 7 miles into town. I'm 20 now and could bike 7 miles rather easily, but being 11 to 13 and biking on hilly terrain in the blistering heat was exhausting. It really wasn't the biking into town that sucked. It was biking into town, playing outside all day doing active things, and then having to bike 7 miles home. I'll never forget how good a glass of cold water was when I finally made it home. I feel you, I really do. For field trips, I was given only enough money for the cost of whatever we were required to do, and that was it. A few times there wasn't an extra $10, so I had to stay behind at school and basically have study hall all day with a handful of other poor kids. Even after I started working as a preteen, $10 was a lot of money. I was making $7 an hour and helping pay household bills. I had to explain so many times that I couldn't go to the mall or the movies or roller skating or the amusement park because I was working but still didn't really have spending money to do that stuff. A friend who had a pretty charmed life growing up just got off her parents' insurance and got her own last year. During a conversation, she was going on about how everyone should be able to go to college since financial aid should cover tuition, if you're financially responsible for it. I pointed out that I had to pay for my own health insurance and dental for 8 years longer than she did. I got my own insurance at 18. At about $1,200 a year in premiums, that was almost $10K of bills she never had to worry about without copays and deductibles added on. That was $10,000 less to pay off student loans with, $10,000 less to have fun with, $10,000 less to save for a house. Story 2. That when you turn 16, you don't get a car. You just get to be 16. I was not poor growing up, but I wouldn't categorize us as rich either. Just pretty solidly middle class. None of my siblings or I got a car when we were 16. My parents provided a lot for us, but a car was something we had to pay for ourselves. And that was a firm rule. I didn't get a car until I was 22, when I had saved up money from working for like 7 years to be able to pay for my own car. 100% with no help from anyone else. I was insanely jealous of friends in college who had cars given to them by their parents because I always had to take the bus everywhere. But I was also saving up money so that when I actually needed to buy a car, I could have some choice, instead of having to settle for a cheap piece of crap. I saved money and waited until I absolutely needed a car. I was in a graduate program, and the school I was placed at for student teaching was 30 minutes away and not accessible on a bus line, so I bought myself a car that summer. Man, was I proud of myself? 2 years later, I still love my car. His name is Bert. For something that big, saving up your hard-earned money and being able to say, "I earned this and it's 100% mine," is an amazing feeling, and in hindsight, I'm glad my parents did this. Now it seems absurd to me how many families I know that just bought a brand new car for their barely licensed 16-year-old. Worked my ass off since I was legally allowed to get my car, working 6.5 hours on school nights. Never got pocket money and was expected to be very independent after getting my job because I had my own money. My parents weren't poor. They were tough on me in terms of what they gave me. This was to teach me how to be independent. Here I am at the ripe old age of 17, living out of home with a roommate eating oats, rice, and eggs and veggies. I am still saving money and am becoming an electrician soon. I just don't get the stuff going on in the US. Parents save money for college and buy a car when they are 16, huge property, and nice houses in suburban cities. Like, where does all this freaking money come from? I had to pay my driver's license, etc. all by myself, and can't afford a damn car even though I'm working. Well, technically I could buy one from my savings, but gas and maintenance are unaffordable to me. What sucks even more is that nearly all my friends got their driver's license from their parents right after turning 18. The dad from one girl only required that she didn't get pregnant or was smoking. Story 3. That Santa doesn't visit some kids. The worst was after the break when the teachers at school would go around the room and ask what everyone got for Christmas. Having to lie about getting a gift always stung a little bit. Santa Claus isn't real. First off, your dad and I worked really hard to get you these presents. Second of all, we don't have a fireplace. So if he came down our chimney, he would catch fire and die. Quote from my mom. Damn, that was one of the finest pieces of truth for 6-year-old me. I had the opposite experience. Santa visited me because my mom couldn't afford to buy a lot of gifts. They weren't always the things I asked him for, still don't have Power Wheels, but they were always fun things I never would have expected to get from my mom because she's always been practical. When I think back on it, my mom worked really hard not to get me everything I wanted, but to make sure I had as great an experience as I could at Christmas. It really was magical. For kid me, I kinda hope to do the same thing with my kids when I have them, even being better off. I grew up in a town that basically just ran on welfare and government funding. I worked with one of the local community service organizations in town. We would take money donations and toy donations from the more well-off people, and one of the government organizations would send us a wish list of kids who might not wake up with any presents to open. We'd get the lists and go on shopping trips until 2 in the morning, wrap the presents and deliver them a few days before Christmas. My family never had to go without presents, and the whole thing really put it into perspective. Story 4. If I break this, my family cannot just afford to buy me another one. Oh god, I went to a private college on a bunch of scholarships and loans, and I met a bunch of rich kids there. I was driving this crappy old Jeep that my dad had crashed a few years before, and it was a mess. It started up like maybe 60% of the time, and there was no predicting it. My roommates told me to go ask my parents for a new car because the one I had was unsafe. They said they knew I might get nervous, but if I made solid points, I would definitely get the car. I had to explain to them that my parents would have loved to get me a new car, but we couldn't afford groceries. And if I asked for one, I would have been laughed out of the house. I'm from a poor family, one of 10. I had to go to school. I was even poorer than the poor kids. I went on 0 school trips, only the free ones. Where other people had money for snacks, I only had a sandwich my dad made me. It was like this every time. In most cases, I resorted to criminal offense, garden stealing, shoplifting, so I could fit in, so I could have things like my friends. This caused for my dad to neglect me. I currently have a girlfriend who is from a rich family, and I literally can't understand how they think. They are so closed-minded, especially my girlfriend. But what I do notice about being poor, living that life allows you to be open-minded, and you acquire loads of life skills. What do I lack? Common sense, general knowledge, education. Thankfully, I have worked really hard and saved up every last penny. I bought my house and have a good job. I'm breaking through the barrier and middle class. Also, can I add poor people in schools, etc. are the ones to get bullied, to be the last picked, to be singled out? It's a horrible life, but it is what it is. Story 5. Graduating from high school / going to university is a really big deal for some people. My parents arrived in the United States from Mexico in the early 90s. They were determined to let me and my siblings have opportunities that they were not afforded in their tiny towns. Although we are better off than we were when I was young, we are still considered poor, and 3 of my siblings graduated high school, and we are each attending universities. It is a huge deal when not many of our extended family have been to a university. Your parents got 4 kids into university and you're all going to finish. I'd say y'all have got something mighty big to be proud of. Your parents for giving you the opportunities they never had, and you and your siblings for taking full advantage of that and soldiering on. Mad props. I hope all of y'all can look back on these days and smile. This is something I've never thought of. My cousin just graduated high school, and I remember that feeling of, why am I getting so many gifts? Having to go to parties? What did you think was going to happen? and graduation from college came and went with little fanfare. Privilege is so ingrained in people that are never taught they have it. My school was pretty divided in income and demographics. We had an IB program and had a lot of rich kids who ended up going to elite universities, and everyone else was from the ghetto and basically deprived of opportunity. Ironically, the rich kids stemmed from the west side of town, which used to be a slave plantation, and the ghetto was located in the former blacks-only community. During the graduation ceremony, you could clearly see that it was a big deal for those underprivileged kids. Meanwhile, my friend viewed graduation as a chore and complained because he'd rather leave early for his summer trip to Europe. I went to a rich kids' high school, and I would ask people what they were doing after graduation. All of them said going to college. I'd ask their major, and they'd tell me, or they'd just shrug. I'd then ask them why that major, and exactly 4 people gave me a reason. It boggles my mind that they can afford to just go to college with no major plan, like expensive private universities, and they're just going because it's what mom and dad said, not because they care about what they're studying or have any plans for their lives. A potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars investment, and you don't even know what it's for. I'm Asian, and going to college was definitely just expected. I honestly can't even fathom how it would have played out with my parents if I didn't go. My family is well off now, but we arrived in the USA when I was 3 years old, with literally just a suitcase of clothes and around $100. My parents struggled hard over the next decade and a half to create a successful life for us. Somehow we managed to become a solidly upper middle class family, while my parents busted ass and saved enough to fully fund my college career. One of the first things they bought after making some money was a college education fund when I was around 5. I was always treated like college was absolutely expected of me. I didn't realize how good I had it until years later. Story 6. Trying to cook and serve dinner loud enough to cover up the sound of your mom crying in her bedroom because she can't afford to pay for the electricity this month. Putting on a cheerful face and acting super chipper for your younger siblings as you pack your bags to stay at a roach-infested motel because no electricity will get you all taken away by CPS. Walking 5 miles round trip to buy dollar store groceries on your food stamps because your mom can't afford a car or the bus. Walking 7 miles round trip to see the Medicaid doctor after being without your medication for 3 months because that's how long it takes to get an appointment. Having to pack everything you've ever owned into 2 bags. Trying to decide what portions of your life can go in the garbage can because your landlord died and your family got evicted. Being excited for cold weather because if the power gets shut off, at least the food will keep. You can't afford to stay late at school or go hang out after class because mom needs help canning, and your friends don't understand what that is. Trolling around the bars at last call hoping someone dropped money and was too drunk to notice. Learning how stores often toss perfectly good food away, and how to not be squeamish about eating next to trash. Coming from Australia, the whole power cuts off if you don't pay your bills thing baffles me. Over here, no matter how broke you are, they'd have to keep electricity flowing because it's considered an essential utility. At least that's my understanding of it. When I used to rent and I said that I was moving out on a certain date, the power didn't go out on that date. They just stopped billing me. Same thing for when you move in. When you go inspect the place, even though nobody's lived there, no electricity account, there's still power. Apparently the reason they can't just shut off power is that if you rely on electricity for life support, medical devices, etc., the power company can still be liable. Nah, you will have your power disconnected for not paying your bill in Australia as well. It takes a very long time and multiple warnings to get to that point though. Like, you would have to receive and not pay at least another 1 or 2 bills, so 3 to 6 months. Power is definitely an essential service, but you have to provide proof that you require power for life support, etc., to not have your power disconnected. Story 7. No, Mark, I can't spend a semester in Europe. Well, if you were paying European tuition, it would be easy. At least at my school, they would pull the BS of making the program so structured that you had to take classes with professors from my school who would just spend the semester abroad with us, so they could charge us full tuition for my school. It was very hard to work with our study abroad office to do a direct exchange, basically a plan it yourself and pick whatever university abroad you want situation, because they would make it virtually impossible to transfer any credits that way. That's BS. My school had a tuition exchange set up so that no matter what, you only paid whatever you paid in the US, 4-year semester abroad tuition. That was the only reason I got abroad, because I had enough financial aid that I could save up / my parents were able to help with some airfare, and I could apply the loan I'd already taken out for the year to tuition abroad. I can't really call myself poor, since another guy in the thread gave a much better description of poorness that made me want to cry, but I'm not exactly rich. In February, I went on vacation in Germany for 2 weeks for pretty cheap. In my current financial situation, my friends are all like, "You shouldn't have spent all your money on going to Europe," but that's actually not even close to the truth. My airfare from Seattle to Munich was $490 round trip, and I stayed in cheap hostels / pensions for most of the trip. I probably spent about $800 on the whole trip and saved it for a year in advance. I could afford to go back to Europe before I could afford to fix my car. Story 8. Filling out the FAFSA without the help of your parents. I never filled out the FAFSA just because my father refused to share his tax documents with me. He didn't want me giving away everything he had ever earned. Screw him, I could have gotten a $3 an hour raise thanks to work study, but no. He wouldn't let the government be allowed to see his tax forms. He's an idiot piece of crap. Actually, rich kids don't even fill out the FAFSA. Yep, if your parents make a bunch of money, you know you certainly aren't eligible for any need-based aid, so there's no point. It does absolutely suck for kids from wealthy families if those families aren't paying for them, though. One of my good friends had to go through months of meetings, gathering evidence and going before a judge to get declared legally emancipated so they could actually be eligible for need-based aid. The family had tons of money but refused to support her in any way and kicked her out at 18. Story 9. Having your parents borrow money you saved up to pay the bills. That living paycheck to paycheck is an actual thing. Late payments and having cell phones, electricity, or water cut off. Visiting cash advance stores with your parents. Having Metro PCS, the amount of unsupervised alone time spent growing up. Both my parents worked all day and couldn't afford summer camp or anything like that. In the summers, I would just hang out in the house alone or with the other neighborhood kids while the parents were at work. Having no money for Christmas trees or fireworks, Halloween costumes to celebrate holidays. I remember once I had made a piggy bank out of Legos and had saved up some birthday / Christmas money in it. Came home one day to find the bank broken and the money gone. I can't remember if it was my older brother or parents who took the money, but the broken piggy bank was icing on the cake. I've known people who have made plenty of money and still managed to live paycheck to paycheck and wind up in this situation because they are living outside their means in some ways. I've known people who make more money than me, blow it all, and wind up needing these cost-cutting measures to survive until their next paycheck comes in, just so they can blow it all at the bars within a week. When I started living on my own, I had a minimum wage job that I was living paycheck to paycheck. My mom calls me up in tears, saying that they are about ready to repo her car, and if she doesn't pay them, she has no way to get to work. That's an hour away. Now, I don't know if any of you have had to listen to your mother cry on the phone, but it is the worst feeling ever. None of my other siblings, even the one that was decently well off, would lend her the money. So I told her I would get it to her by the end of the week. I ended up having to sell all of my furniture, but I have no regrets about what I did. Story 10. How awesome it is to buy a cheap Honda that'll run forever. Some people think they need to change cars every 5 years or something. Drives me insane. Coworkers bugged me non-stop when I was going to finally get rid of my '93 Camry for a new car. Geez, I don't know. How about when it finally breaks down or the repairs outweigh the cost of keeping it? A lot of the truly wealthy people won't spend wastefully on cars if they know how fast cars depreciate. Most of the very rich people I've met drive good solid cars and don't switch them out often. I would consider my father relatively wealthy. My first car was a '93 Mazda we had since I was a baby. When it finally became more expensive to fix than it was worth in 2014, then we bought my grandmother's car from her before she went into the nursing home. It was a '98 Mazda, same model, and only had about 36,000 miles on it. If it wasn't driven in a state where they salted the roads and it got so much rust, I would suspect I could squeeze 5 to 6 more years out of it. With the rust, maybe 2. On the contrary, most wealthy people I know lease their cars. They'll buy 1 or 2 really good ones, e.g. Rolls-Royce, for the status, but the daily drivers are nearly always leased. always with no money down and all taxes built into the lease. I don't consider myself wealthy, drive a 17 Lexus that I leased, and my family's been leasing exclusively for about 15 years, and 10 different cars. Now. Except that I don't really have to drive it far. 10k miles a year is more than enough for me to get to work and back. Plus, take a few 100-mile road trips a few times a year. With gas, insurance, and tolls, I pay about 11k a year for the thing, and paid exactly zero, aside from the first month's payment, when I took the car from my dealer. Something I can afford quite easily. I can certainly understand why people would buy cars. If you drive a lot, leasing is a waste of money. But unless you're an automobile collector, your cars will lose value. To get me from point A to point B in a comfortable manner without really worrying that the thing will break down on me, and the added bonus of getting a new car every 3 years, to me that peace of mind and simplicity is worth the money I pay every year. Story 11. Being an outcast in an activity because you can't afford it. Field trips, movies, etc. The shame involved in not being able to participate in those activities or knowing that your parents scraped up literally every last penny they had so that you could go on a field trip. I remember in 2nd grade my mom gave me a coin purse full of all of her change to pay for the trip. The teacher made fun of me in front of the class for handing her so much change. Screw her. Mom moved heaven and earth to make that happen. I remember in 6th grade we had yearbooks and everyone in my classroom had one but me. I remember it like it was yesterday. Everyone was laughing at the pictures and I was just sitting at my desk with my head low. My teacher was super nice though and saw that I was upset and tried to comfort me. My friend at the time came up to me and showed me the funny photos. But the shame that comes with being poor, honestly it's crazy how much damage it does to your psyche. I'm just noticing how deep the shame is at 22. When my daughter was in daycare, I was a single parent with relatively little income. I had enough for the necessities of everyday living, but I didn't really have anything left over for unexpected expenses. This being Finland, the daycare expected that all families would have ice skates and cross-country skis for their kids. We borrowed what we could from relatives or bought secondhand stuff from thrift shops. But it really irked me that the daycare just expected everybody could go out and buy new skates or skis for their kids. At least when she went to elementary school, the school had extra equipment for kids to borrow if they didn't have their own. My school had so many that I didn't get to go on. The most expensive one I went to was the London Natural History Museum for £5. Around $8 at the time for you Americans. In the final year of upper school, everybody got to go to France on the Eurostar for only around £80. Really not a lot of money to most people. So everybody went. My sister got to go the year before because my dad scraped and saved, but he just couldn't get it together for me. Now I work full-time, so I have a bit of money and I'm going on my first ever holiday out of the country next month. Whenever I tell everyone I've never left the UK, they look at me like I'm an alien. Story 12. When I was young and super poor, my rich friends would get mad at me for not having the money to do things with them. From their perspective, I was just ditching them all the time. More recently, my SO, who comes from a wealthy family, and I have been making common law official and moving towards being married, and he totally freaked out about the fact that I have student loans. Apparently, he didn't realize that a kid who grew up below the poverty line wouldn't have school paid for them in full. In other words, rich kids don't seem to get that money can be scarce. Similar position here. My wife is from a good family. I was from the middle class. She now doesn't understand why we can't go for a Christmas trip somewhere cold for the new year. I love her, but dear me, there's a limit on what I can spend. From a family of doctors, so I think people might consider me rich. I had a friend who was really poor, and we couldn't really do anything because he usually couldn't pay for it. I was his friend for a long time, but then I ditched him when he got a job and started spending his bills on marijuana instead of saving up for cool stuff, like skateboards or eventually an Xbox, so that we could play online together. It started out that he only bought a little bit, and I would buy and smoke some with him too, but then it started getting worse and he started spending entire paychecks just on marijuana. Not to mention I always hated our friend group because people would always expect me to pay for them for things, but I didn't want to, and they always tried to make me feel awkward if I didn't succumb. This has nothing to do with anything, and I just want to see what other Redditors say to see if I made the right choice. I don't want comfort, I just want some peace of mind or maybe a conclusion. My wife was very middle class, but her parents were able to pay for her 4-year degree, along with a modest scholarship and her living off campus after the first year in order to pay for it all. Then she was dating a very wealthy for the area guy whom she lived with for the last 1.5 years of college. I, however, got books somewhat paid for and a free place to live at home while I went to community college, and then the local university while working full-time because my parents were just a hair over the poverty line. Student loans and not taking a full load of courses is how I paid for my schooling. Now she doesn't get why, and I won't fully pay for a new car for my stepsons, and also pay for half their college along with their father, who was on the hook for the other half. I told her that I certainly can't afford it, and that I'd help with their loan payments, but they have to have some incentive to do well/skin in their game. They're almost old enough to drive. I already have a gentleman's agreement with their father that he and I will match whatever they save up for a car, so that they're not buying a $1,500 box like I had to as a kid, which usually means 3 times the amount of repairs per year. I'd rather we buy the Crapwagon 2QZ for $4,500, so it'll be reliable until we get near the end of college. Story 13. Having your entire wardrobe consist of the clothes your older, much taller brother grew out of. That and only ever getting to stay at a Motel 6 when traveling. I'm talking about the Motel 6 of the 1980s, which was usually around $25 to $30 a night, where you were lucky if there was a complimentary bar of soap in the bathroom and pillows on the bed that didn't have mystery brown and yellow stains on them. My sister and I have vastly different body types. I was short and fit, but built like a tree stump. She was short, fit, and built like a bird, so she never got my hand-me-downs because they wouldn't have fit. We did often get hand-me-downs from other people at my mom's church though, and when we were done, if they were in decent enough shape, they'd get passed on. Mom told me the other day that the ugly pink puffer jacket somebody gave to me in the 5th grade is still making the rounds, 30 years later. I don't think that jacket is ever going to die. I am Indian and comfortably middle class, and we have large extended families, and sharing clothes is like the way of life. I was the oldest girl child, so I always got new stuff. Then my middle sister got those clothes, then my younger sister if they still survived, and then it would go off to my cousins. Also later I grew to be about the same size as my mom and aunts, at which point I would just get some of their clothes. Now that almost all girls except 2 little ones are grown up, we willingly rotate our clothes amongst each other, at least whatever fits us properly. We would all get a few new clothes occasionally, but the bulk of it was used clothes. I have had cousins fight for a used top. We live in different parts of the country and many times courier the clothes. Not using clothes till they can be used is an unheard of concept for most of us. Story 14. How I've had this phone for 5 years of good old iPhone 7. Why don't you upgrade? Yeah, because I just can. I still use my 7 because I like the size. All the phones are turning into tablets, and I don't want to have to get a carrying case or backpack to lug around a phone. I like that the 4 fits easily in my pockets. Story 15. Rich kids can never understand the pain, humiliation, helplessness, and sadness of seeing your mom walk in the door with a box of food that you know she had to beg the food bank to let her have. Thinking about this now still makes me upset, but when I was a kid, it was a fact of life that I was too young to embrace the burden. Times like that made me grow up way too fast. While other kids might have just complained about frivolous stuff, seeing my mother go through that really left me feeling upset and helpless. Financially, I'm okay right now. However, my son and I have been through some hard times. It shattered my heart more than you'll ever know to hear the excitement in my son's voice when he was 5 and asked me, "Did you go to the food bank today? We have snacks?" I was like your kid. I absolutely loved it when my mom went to the food bank. It was the only time that I could have donuts, even though they were stale and the frosting was all gooped and mixed up on the bottom of the bag and not on the donuts themselves. Those were one of my top 5 favorite things. Donuts were nearly $1 for 2 of them, and I had siblings. That expense usually wasn't accounted for in our tight budget, unless my mom decided she just wasn't hungry again. Not only that, name brand cereal. My son was so stoked to have a real Captain Crunch for the first time when he was younger. Also, it was super cool. One of the few times that we had to utilize the food bank, they gave my son a nice bag of beach toys. Now that I'm in a completely different spot in my life, I donate time and resources to that same food bank that was able to help me out. Not saying that for karma, but I wish more people who had to go through the tough times and got to the other side would remember where they've been and did what they could to give back. Thanks for watching until the end. If you have a similar story to these that you would like to share with us, please leave it in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please leave us a like, and please subscribe as well. For more videos like this one right now, please stop by our channel where we have dozens upon dozens. Thanks again, and see you next time.